Welcome.
Good evening. Welcome to Center Place. Welcome to our ongoing series that we've started now, a historian and a theologian react to. We previously, Leandro and I, watched The Last Temptation of Christ. Passion of the Christ. These have similar names.
The Passion of the Christ. Yeah, it's
movie.
Confusing, but it's a very different movie.
Very different movie. So we watched the Mel Gibson movie, and then we watched one of the old 60s sword-and-sandal movies, King of Kings, with Captain Christopher Pike from the original Star Trek pilot, with his blue eyes, as he kind of wandered around as a very emotionally removed Jesus from, and that kind of a thing in the King of Kings movie, the 60s movie.
And yet a Jesus that still looks very much like the traditional romantic expectation what a Jesus might look like.
Right.
As opposed to
William Dafoe.
Yes.
So this is what we watched this time, is the, I guess, controversial, in some regards anyways. It wasn't that, I feel like it couldn't have been that controversial, but anyway, sort of faux controversial, what was the date of this?
1988.
1988, Martin Scorsese film, The Last Temptation of Christ. So this was an adaptation of a novel by Nikos Kazantzakis. So go ahead, and we have it. So here we have a quotation.
Kazantzakis.
So it begins with a scroll like Star Wars, where it kind of sets up this idea of what the story is going to be about, which is that it is looking into this kind of a dualism, as it's between humanity, the human and the divine in the story of Christ. And so it starts out with a quote from the book, and then it goes right into saying this film is not based on the Gospels, but upon this fictional exploration of this eternal spiritual conflict. And it is very accurate in saying it's not based on the Gospels.
Like, thanks for letting us know. Otherwise, how would we ever know it's not based in the Gospel?
So sort of our format as we've done this is that we're going to kind of go through the movie and kind of do it. We've taken some screen captures, and so we will kind of run through the scenes. We'll react to the scenes as we were kind of having it.
There's nothing to react. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, we're going to do some exposition based on our observations, even if you want to react or not. I don't know. Yeah. And then we're also Mike is here, and he is watching all of your comments and the chats. And so if you're having comments and questions and want to interject, some of those will get brought across. And so we appreciate that. Appreciate all of the support that you have for these. We try to do something every Tuesday. The problem is it's hard to make a new lecture every single week, and sometimes we get behind. We need a little bit of a break to be able to do this. It actually turned out this was almost as much work as doing a new lecture.
It's a very long movie.
It was a long movie, and it was a lot to get through, and we also a lot to think about because it's a little bit of a weird movie, I think, too. And so it was just as a showing a little of our cards here, but it's some strangeness in the movie that we had to kind of look into it and look at.
It takes a lot of energy to go through the 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah, it was a long.
So I don't know. If you had a chance to watch it recently or rewatch it, do let us know. Let us know what that experience was to you. I found it exhausting, a little bit slow, just to say.
It was a slow movie,
but I don't know. I didn't dislike it.
So we because of a lot of work, Leandro was about to going to a conference in the Philippines, and so he had a lot of work to do, and so we started watching this late last night, and I fell asleep actually. So I did find it slow. So then we had to watch the rest of it this morning. So anyway, that's where we're at with it. So this is a Martin Scorsese film, and so he's of course a very celebrated director. He had already done some very well acclaimed movies at this point. So he had done in '74. Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, 76 Taxi Driver, 1980 Raging Bull. So he's coming off on, a long string of some important movies that people like, and he therefore presumably could pick what he wanted to do, and presumably wanted this as his movie. So that's
The
where
vanity movie kind of thing.
Well, I don't know
to
about
you?
that. In other words, he could pick his own projects, is what I'd say. Okay, so we should just start right into it, jump right into it?
Let's jump right into it.
So we begin with a character. We don't, if you read ahead in the reviews like I did, we knew that William Dafoe is going to be who he's going to be, but it doesn't immediately say in the actual movie that this is Jesus. But so.
And this is, I think, why it's a very interesting casting choice to have him. You assume that it's him, but then it's not really clear. And he also doesn't look like, in all the other movies that we watched, Jesus definitely looks like Jesus. There's no doubt.
The romantic classic portrait, right, that they want to do. And so he is very different looking than that, I guess. And so it's an interesting casting.
But this is something that the movie is going to do with a lot of characters. You just have to guess who the character is, and then later on the movie will reveal the name of the character. So they do that with several characters.
So it's a guy. We don't know who it is yet. But as a guy, he is a carpenter. And so we sort of had that, we've had that in a couple of these, including, remember in the Mel Gibson one, Jesus actually invents the table, because everybody before this was using these short Roman tables and lying on couches and things, and he invents the modern, the way we have tables in North America, but anyway, high tables. So in this case, though, it's a crazy different thing of what kind of a carpenter he is, because he specifically is a crossmaker.
Is a crossmaker, yeah.
And he's sort of obsessed with them, and so he makes these cross beams for the crosses, I guess. And as he's already kind of trying them out to make sure it's good, it's, I guess, a prefiguring.
But then he even has these wounds on his back already at this point in the movie. Like, I don't, that's unclear why that would happen. Although we might get it.
Saying that he was
Yeah, he was
So he is maybe punishing himself already, and there's a person. I don't remember that detail.
Yeah, I think he mentions that. Like, he mentions that to his friend who's going to come visit later.
Yeah. So his friend, he surprises him, and so we meet a friend who, again, we don't know who it is unless you knew that. So it's Harvey Keitel, who's a famous actor, and if you had, I hadn't seen that. This is the first time I've seen this movie. But I had known that who Harvey Keitel plays. So
okay.
I should reveal this yet, because it's not told, so he doesn't say the name right away.
Not right away. At this point, none of the names have been said.
But anyway, his friend, Harvey Keitel, is very disappointed with him for this cross-making business. He doesn't think you should be in the cross-making business, because it's essentially you're a collaborator with the Romans in the kind of the worst possible way, because it's not only are they occupying our kingdom here, but they, but this is, you're actually helping them execute everybody.
Right. So you are part of this system of violence, this is when I started thinking, wait, is he really Jesus? Because there's nowhere in Scripture that says that's what Jesus was doing as a carpenter.
Right. And so it is a. So the movie already here is in its. So it's setting these things up, and it's doing this exploration that's not from the Gospels, but in doing this particular one, there's a big difference between a person's character arc if they go from total collaborator, the guy who's making the crosses for the Roman Empire, and then to where he goes, right? And so in fact, because not everybody in the system has to collaborate to this degree, because it turns out that this is a very unpopular thing. And so again, his friend is telling him, you shouldn't be doing this stuff. Everybody's saying that. And so what we now see is the next phase of this. He's not just making these things; he's actually delivering them to the site, and one of the people that's helping do the crucifixions. And so there's a guy who's dragged out by, I guess, Roman guards who's got a guy in chains. And so then our carpenter guy picks the crossbeam up and carries it to the execution site.
Which is, I was looking that up to see if there's any sources that actually say that this is how crucifixions happened.
Yeah.
That like the beam was paraded together with the accused, and apparently that's just tradition. It's not clear that this is how it happened. But here, okay, you do have this guy who makes crosses, who is carrying the beam for the accused. So he's a total collaborator at this point.
Yeah. And so it's, again, not a popular thing. So everybody in the whole town doesn't like the fact that he's helping. And in fact, there's we don't know what the woman, anyway, a woman who is dressed with a lot of gold, and she has a lot of weird tattoos and things like that. We don't know who she is, but she spits on him because she's so mad at him for doing this. And one of the things that I did find very distracting throughout this entire movie is like all of the women specifically have, strange tattoos all over their, like their feet, their hands, their face. And it is, it's one of the things that I felt like there's the thing the movie kind of does is this exoticizing and orientalizing, this idea that there's all kinds of weird stereotypes of the weird East in the movie.
This is not like the Israel that we see in other movies. Definitely not in the two movies, in the Temptation, in the Passion of the Christ, and in the King of Kings. This is a very strange Oriental take on Palestine, Israel.
Well, and tattoos are they're prohibited in Leviticus.
Right, but then it's unclear sometimes. It's a little bit of a mix that we see sometimes. It's unclear whether we're seeing Jewish people or we're seeing Greeks or foreigners in the land. It's like there's a lot of things that look rather pagan. Yeah,
but we know who this character is eventually going to be, even though they haven't told us yet. And so we don't know yet.
No spoilers.
So we get to the cross. He brings the cross beam. They put it all together, and they start reading the charges, and they put a little plaque over it to tell what the guy has been convicted of, which is seditio, so sedition. And so then our carpenter guy is helping hold the whole thing together when they drive nails into this, and so there's again a prefiguring kind of moment, which causes him and the others to be traumatized. He gets a bunch of blood all over him and so forth.
Right. Yeah, and this is clearly one of the things that is happening in this movie. Like the character of Jesus, we get into his mind. There's a psychological development happen, and clearly, he's really traumatized by being part of this.
Yeah. Well, and so the next thing we see is that when he leaves town, he thinks people are following him, or he hears voices. He starts to writhe around on the ground, and so I kind of took this as a sort of a modern lens for how modern people try to understand how ancient people write about Revelation. In other words, as mental illness is often a modern framing or lens or something like that, because of, again, a modern tendency to read ancient texts very literally and imagine, as opposed to their literary texts. And so they have to then create historicized psychological ways to what we would think it would be if a person actually literally heard voices and things like that.
Yeah, it's either mental illness or drugs, but that even is something that sometimes people speculate when they approach the writings of the mystics, even from much later mystics.
So anyway, so Jesus goes, he's left home, he comes to the city. We don't hear what the city even is, I think, yet, but again, this is very much an exotic, orientalized city. There are people who have African slaves for some reason. There are people wandering around with turbans. There. He follows the guy with the turban into a weird, I don't know what, house, something, where they all are essentially watching a sex show. And again, while he's here in there watching this, there's all of these guys who are, again, very much of this orientalized weirdness that is kind of happening continuously as the setting. Like there's a lady in there that's cooking crabs. And she's got snails all over her. And so, Israelites, again, can't eat shellfish. But anyway, whatever this is, it's just very exotic. And in front of the sex show, there's these chameleons and lizards and things. So it's meant to be a very strange, weird thing. So when that whole thing ends and breaks up, Jesus goes and talks to the woman that's in the show here. And this is the same woman that spit on him earlier. And they have some kind of a past. She knows him.
She knows him, definitely. And she tells him, like, even that she knew some of his adventures in the desert. So that definitely this is they do have a relationship going on here.
Yeah. So
A platonic relationship.
it's a platonic relationship because she definitely, I mean, at this point she says that, she says that he's a virgin, right?
Well, yeah. Here it becomes clear, like, Jesus is a virgin. So, yeah.
Oh, well, if we know that he's Jesus yet, has she?
Oh,
dated
yes,
him?
we don't know. It's sorry.
So anyway, so these two,
This
as they're
gentleman
talking
is
to
a
him,
virgin.
and she can say, he can stay in a prostitute's. I think she won't touch him or anything like that, but he doesn't stay. So he wanders off and goes to a monastery.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of monastery that has a bunch of little individualized cells, which is one of the ways that ancient monasteries worked. It's one of the monks are like, one of the ideas of monks is they're individualized hermits as opposed to living together in a community. And so he meets, as he's going to the monastery, he meets an old guy who welcomes him, gives him hospitality, takes him to helps him set up his own little hermit lodge, and so forth. And then once he wakes up in the morning, the guy had said that they're all busy, they're all at a funeral. And when he wakes up in the morning to go to and sees them all, it was this guy's funeral who he had been talking to, and they said it's impossible for you to have been talking to him because he was already dead.
Already dead.
So that's our first indication that there's some supernatural stuff.
Something happening here. And at this point, what I'm wondering is, who are these people?
Yeah, who are they supposed to be? Well, so you were watching it, and you made the assumption.
I thought maybe this is John the Baptist, but I know that John the Baptist doesn't die in this way. He gets killed. So again, who are they?
And so we thought maybe, that this is meant to be like Essenes.
Or at least the Dead Sea Scroll community.
The Dead Sea Scroll community, because of the novel was written.
It's just
right
a
around the
couple
same
of
time
years
when the Dead Sea
after
Scrolls
they were found, but I
and
don't
so-
know if he would have known about it.
So yeah, I don't. So it wasn't necessarily clear what was going on with that. But after he realizes that the guy he'd been talking to was already dead, he goes with them to bury him, which they go and do in the desert. And then he starts having kind of this long conversation with one of the disciples of this aged master who's been buried. And so they have a big, long kind of theological conversation. One of the ideas here is that this disciple wishes that he had the kind of clarity of revelation that I'm going to say William Dafoe, I guess, is having, because he always knows. In other words, God is always talking to him. He always knows what he's supposed to do. Whereas the other guy's like, he's spent his whole life devoted to this. He never knows for sure what God is calling him or if God's even there. So, is there anything else in their conversation that you were?
No. I think it's I found this whole part like I was just so just distracted thinking about who are these people.
Okay.
It's like,
All right. So the next he, is having that later that night or whatever, he ends up having a vision where a snake appears to him. And you were saying that this is the first time.
So this is the first time that we actually get the name. This is when the name of Jesus is revealed in this scene with the snake.
So we're starting to have this idea that we know who he is, that he's Jesus for sure.
Now
That's
there's
been
no
confirmed.
doubt.
But we also then are seeing that he's a visionary. God talks to him, and he also has visions of like the snake and talking
And so he definitely has certain powers. So that's becoming clear. Or it could also be some mental health condition at this point. But
Right.
clearly we now know at the very least that this is Jesus. The name has been revealed in this context of danger, but also this idea of the snake as a biblical character that is connected with temptation.
Right, and so yeah, there the film makes a bunch of references back to the Eden story, with this snake and tree and apples and things like that. So whether or not that's what exactly is going on, that's just the first of the taste of these with the snake, right?
And we'll see that later. More a little bit the Eden myth theme developed in the movie. Not yet.
Okay. So that's him talking to them. So then we are introduced. His friend comes back, and his friend is a zealot. And a zealot is one of the, it's a contemporary sect or movement of kind of the more violent reactionaries. And so this zealot is at this point that he was going to try to kill him?
So at this point, this character is here to kill him.
Okay.
And he's a zealot, we believe. He doesn't say I'm a zealot, but we assume that he's with this rather violent sect that they have decided they have to kill Jesus because Jesus is a problem for the overall plan that they have of liberation of Israel at this moment.
Yeah. Okay. But it seems premature because I don't think that he's done very much yet. But anyway. But next scene we cut to the same woman that we've been meeting a couple times here, the prostitute who's now being dragged through the street.
But we need to go back to the previous scene. Okay. Because here is when the name Judas is revealed.
Oh, is it?
Yes. So first is revealed the name of Jesus, and soon after that, pretty much the next scene is when once the character decided he's not going to kill him, then we hear that this is.
So Harvey Keitel turns out it's Judas, and so there, but what's interesting therefore is this is one of the movies where Judas becomes the main disciple, right?
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
This is not. No, I'm confused. This is not. We still don't know it's Judas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
well, I didn't think it was assumed.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. So maybe in any event, he's come back, and we realize that he's much more reactionary. So he didn't want him to collaborate. He also wants a violent revolution. So now we go to the stoning scene. This is the famous woman taken in adultery story from the Gospel, what's now in the Gospel of John. And it's the same woman that we've met earlier. And so, of course, Judas and Jesus are upset about this. The whole mob is all around them. And Jesus does essentially, if any of you aren't perfect, go ahead and you be the one.
Right. Which he's not. So here the saying is not exactly as it works in Scripture.
Right.
The whole scene is not as John depicts it in the Gospel, and definitely Judas is not there with them, and definitely this character is not there. This is a very interesting choice and very interesting
Zebedee.
creation. Yeah.
So Zebedee was able to come up and say, "Well, I'm righteous enough to do it, so I'm going to come and do it." So it is a very different kind of take on it. He has to kind of face Zebedee down because Zebedee feels like he's righteous enough to stone her. And so Zebedee is certainly not one of the characters that was stoning the woman taken in adultery. Zebedee is the dad of the Apostle John and his brother.
And by the way, the scene at the in the Gospel of John happens at the temple. Here they're in the middle of nowhere, and all the accusers are supposed to be the temple leadership. Levites, Pharisees, not these
the regular
peasants.
people in the crowd. Yeah.
But I found the choice of this character to be the one, the righteous one that wants to throw the first stone kind of interesting. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's strange, but anyway, I don't know. I mean, it was like I was like, why?
Yeah.
Well, so the problem with
Everything
it is,
in the
they
movie
make it Zebedee, right? So Zebedee is the Apostle John's dad. Do they really ever develop that in the movie? I mean, so the problem is, so the other apostles, so Judas becomes the main apostle. We get to see Peter a fair amount, but he's kind of reduced to being sort of he's a more dim-witted one.
Yeah,
that Judas is kind of leading around, and but for the other ones like John I couldn't recognize him out of the lineup.
Yeah, he didn't look any younger than anyone else.
Right, and so that's why I don't know. It is. I think it's kind of sort of just a random that they just picked a guy who has a fun name, and they just made him be the one that's going to do it. So I don't know. So he's able to save her. So as we now kind of are finding out, as these characters are emerging, this is going to be Mary Magdalene. And so this is once again this issue that is in tradition, but not in the Gospels. This isn't, I guess, it's based on the Gospels anyway, but it's in the tradition, this idea that the woman taken in adultery would be Mary Magdalene, which is, that's not scriptural, that's not a good identification, but it's one of these things that people like to do because they would like Mary Magdalene to have been a prostitute, and they also want her to be a love interest for Jesus.
And it's not only in this movie that all the Mary character and the adulteress and even sometimes other Marys get fused into the same character. I think it's
something it's been in all the ones we've watched so far, right?
It's very tempting for these writers, for these directors to just that's the Mary.
Yeah, they have less women characters to have to deal with, and they don't all have to have the same name, unfortunately. The way, although the woman taken in adultery, we don't know her name. So.
But this is also, I think, in the way that it works in a movie about temptation here. Because there's a psychological component about the development of Jesus' character that there seems to be a little bit of, on the one hand, compassion from Jesus as a savior, as a wise teacher, rabbi.
Yep.
On the other hand, because we've seen in this other scene at this sex club that there is a sexual tension.
Yeah.
Even she told him at some point, to take my body and save it, right?
Yeah.
When she's revealing that he's a virgin.
Right.
So there's always that tension with this character that becomes very convenient every time she appears.
Okay. Okay, very good. Sorry, I'm just also trying to check in with Mike and seeing if I can hear the different questions. So let's go to the next slide. So the next thing that happens is, this is where he starts to kind of have a career of preaching.
Yep.
And so he becomes kind of a teacher, and so immediately as he starts doing that, people ask, who's this guy? And the lady's like, well, that's Jesus of Nazareth. And so then this fellow has this line, even the scriptures say, can anything good come out of Nazareth?
The scriptures, right. Unfortunately, the scriptures that he's referring to would be written 60 years later. So.
Right. So it's Christian scriptures that say that in
yeah.
response to Jesus. It's not a scriptures that's coming out of the Hebrew Bible and something like that. So that's a misunderstanding of that. But anyway, it's kind of funny. All right. So then he starts telling different parables and things like that. So I think
this is one of the weirdest scenes ever, and because it turns out that he's a terrible, terrible preacher.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, if I get someone here that preaches like that on a Sunday, I walk out. And not surprisingly, nobody is impressed. So he's out of nowhere. He starts telling people parables. He starts like the parable of the sower, and people are, okay.
Yeah.
Nobody is impressed. And he's also trying to, like sometimes happens in the Gospels, he will, explain what the parable means. And this is, I am this, and the seeds mean that, and the stones are that. And people are they won't have it.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's portrayed as a very unimpressive teacher, and the crowd aren't having any of it. And so he starts moving into the Beatitudes, and
he moves to the Sermon on the Mount, which, they are technically on a mount, but this also looks very much like those high places that supposedly had been taken down by this time, although they still exist. There's archaeology that suggests some high places were still around.
Okay.
However, this high place looks a lot like the gate of Ishtar to me, with those bowls like that over the aqua lapis lazuli background. So yes, it's a very strange choice.
Well, and again, there's a disconnect between like the level of importance of this guy's movement in a way, and the order of how it's all happening, and when he's a teacher, he is not charismatic. He he's and people are also, they're not portraying anybody as listening to him or being interested. So it is a weird choice, I think.
And it's weird why he would even preach in this way. Usually in the Gospels it's in response to something that people ask, and he responds in this often unsatisfying way with a parable that nobody understands.
Yeah.
But here he goes from parable to the Beatitudes to telling everyone, love one another.
Right.
And that's when people get really angry, and it's like, well, pretty much we're starving, and you come here to talk about love. Get out. So people really, that love one another, all you need is love, that doesn't work well with the audience here.
But that's this. So this guy, Jesus goes through a number of phases, and phase one, his philosophy is to tell everybody to just love each other in this movie. So then we get a montage, and so despite that reaction from people, he begins with a couple disciples, and then a little bit more disciples, a little bit more disciples, a little bit more disciples. So it's like
I think this is a cool scene, right?
It's like the kind of 80s montage when people are they're getting into shape so that they can fight in a big boxing match or whatever it is, and so this we don't have to watch them call all these disciples.
It looks like a music video almost.
Yeah. All right. So then after the montage, we're having some conversations with Judas, and this is where
the name of Judas gets revealed. He has so many intimate conversations with Judas that I got confused.
Yeah. Yep. And so Judas is definitely focused on the Roman occupation. He is not interested in kind of all that stuff about the Spirit and the kingdom of God and things like that. That has to come second. What has to come first is we got to get the Romans out of here, and that kind of a thing. And so they're expressing the two different positions on that, I think.
And he's definitely not a bad guy. This is a good guy.
Yeah.
His intentions are to liberate the people, and he's at this point he really likes Jesus. This is he no longer wants to kill him, but also we start seeing once again this psychological development of both characters, because I think, I don't know, other than Jesus and Judas, I'm not sure any other character, at least in the movie, gets the same kind of development. It's just these two, and these two work like a mirror. Everything that Judas is, Jesus is the opposite, and vice versa. So we will get that kind of contrast in other scenes, but here Judas has certainty about what needs to be done, and Jesus is always the one that's like, I don't know. There's a lot of hesitation in Jesus at this point in the movie, and Jesus at this point specifically is talking about, he begins to talk about this idea of love and the kingdom of God, whereas Judas is very, very focused on this world. Jesus is focused on some other world that he's not able to fully explain what kind of world he's talking about.
And so like you say, this is and it's going to be all through the movie. This is a very sympathetic portrayal of Judas. So sometimes Judas is a terrible enemy. It's not this movie. So he's a great friend of his, even though they don't disagree. They continue to be very close. So, as he's sleeping here, Jesus has now a vision. It's a vision of an apple tree. So we've had the snake before, and now we're having an apple tree.
Yeah. And so clear, once again, like this clear symbolism of temptation.
Yeah.
And he eats the apple.
No, not yet.
Not yet? Eventually he will.
So I don't think so. It's later. You're seeing all these visions. You want to collapse this movie. But the movie is very slow. None of the things that you think are happen yet.
I don't want to make this podcast very slow.
All right. So then they decide, well, they got to go see John the Baptist to figure out what they're supposed to do. And so they go to John the Baptist, where they meet him, I guess in the Jordan Valley, presumably. And it is a weird, orgiastic kind of, again, orientalizing vibe. You were saying that you've noticed the music for the first time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that intense music happened before in the movie, but definitely when we get to this scene and you see all these naked, half-naked people running around, that
and dancing
was not really something that we saw too much in the other movies, but here there's a lot of skin and there's a lot of kind of very erotic, intense music happening in the middle of the desert with all these crazy people.
Well, and they actually zoom in, and some of John's people have weird instruments. They've got somebody's got like a very primitive guitar, and somebody's got like hand
some
cymbals,
strange
all kinds of things.
Instruments.
But I guess Peter Gabriel composed the score to this movie. So there we are. So John the Baptist is an apocalyptic preacher. That's sort of in the vein of the actual character from the Gospels, and he is telling everybody that the end is coming in very graphic terms. And Jesus has had vision where he's seen him before. John's also seen him before in a vision. And so they kind of connect on that kind of level, and they immediately kind of go off and have a big, long talk to each other. And Jesus is essentially testing out his sort of gospel of love kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There's a baptism first. I forgot.
Yeah, so that's the John the Baptist immediately recognizes, okay, there's something unusual about this guy, and there's a little bit of like an exchange, and yeah, it just becomes clear, okay, this is the one that I've been talking about, I've been preparing people about, and the baptism happens here at this point, and and
essentially John the Baptist tries to talk him out of this love stuff, more or less says we need something a little more. He's more on Judas's side in terms of this. So after they have their conversation, Jesus goes off into the desert.
Something that is really interesting that happens in that conversation with John the Baptist is that I think it's John the Baptist. I don't know, John the Baptist or Jesus. One of them says, "God, or our God, is a God of the desert."
Okay.
And so that's one reason why
okay.
he has to go out there. Now that's really where you find God. That's where, it's like contradicting the idea that the dwelling place of God is the Jerusalem temple. No, this is a God who you find here.
So Ted Gemberling says, Leandro, maybe Jesus was a terrible preacher. He points out that he thinks that Josephus seems to consider John the Baptist to be the more important figure between the two. And yet I would still suspect that they're both pretty good preachers, since they get known for that, and so in other words, you get to be a leader that gets mentioned, in Josephus because you're, fairly charismatic, is what I would suggest.
But as we will see later, that's not the take of this movie.
Okay.
This movie, well, no spoilers at this point, but
Okay.
at the end we'll see why people remember Jesus through someone else who has a totally different view of Jesus.
Yeah. K. Dempus Bradford says, I was disappointed by the Baptist scene, not because of just the random naked people, but because the moment is flat, so we don't see anything amazing happen even in Jesus' head. And it is a movie that doesn't shy away from all kinds of strange supernatural things. We're going to see So we saw in, I think it was King of Kings, I think maybe both of them, that both King of Kings and The Last Temptation of Christ were not about showing visuals of supernatural things happening on screen. It was things that might have happened, or sort of, you could have a...
In the Passion, there's sometimes a figure of the devil.
Right.
You know there's something weird because the devil is here.
But that could be inside his head.
Right.
Right. So I don't know. I feel like, but this one, there's all kinds of things like that do happen on screen. So there could have been something like you say, Kate Tempest, for that scene, but it doesn't happen.
And I also thought that it should have been a little bit more developed, this idea of what really happens here during baptism. I think so, and I agree with Kate Tempest that this is very flat and we get no information. And I think that often part of the problem here is that some of these authors who write this kind of fan fiction about the Gospels, or even like these directors, they don't really understand all the different views that Christian theologians have over time about what is it that really happens at this moment.
Yeah.
And so they miss the fact that, like, for example, in a movie that is developing like the psychology of Jesus, the character of Jesus that we get at the beginning is going to be very different from the character that we see at the end. But what is happening here? Is he just acknowledging that, okay, this is my mission, and the baptism here just marks the beginning of the mission? Or is this more like an adoptionism take, where actually this is when the Spirit,
But we don't see the Spirit do that.
But we don't see the Spirit.
So
There's nothing.
Happen. No, it actually
very
doesn't
unclear.
explain
This
what
is
they're
just
doing at all.
It's a technicality in the story.
Yeah, they're more or less, this is something that John is doing to people. He's baptizing people. But what it is or what it means is not, I think, explained in the movie.
There's nothing ontological here. The only thing that we might get out of this is, okay, this marks now the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and that's all.
Except it doesn't, because...
But he's already doing it.
So in the Gospels it does, because it's the beginning of the Gospel stories. In this movie it doesn't, because he's already got all of this bunch of disciples. He's already given the Sermon on the Mount.
That's another strange thing that the movie has. It's like it just moves all the sequence of events around, and so at this point Jesus already has a following.
Well, and this is why I thought it was... So this is the thing. So you presumed that when he first met the wise aged master of the Essenes, or whatever, the Dead Sea Scroll people, that you thought, well, that must be John the Baptist, because it happens at the very beginning. And by the way, because he had that extra scene that doesn't exist, now this becomes a duplicate and it's added later.
There's a lot of duplicates. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it's like intentional in the sense that is it trying to confuse the audience? Because I totally thought, okay, well, maybe he's already baptized and all that because he is already preaching the Temple of the Mount, and he already has all these disciples. He's telling the parable of the sower and so on.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, he was already out in the desert with the monks, and when he was out there, he saw Satan, presumably, or whatever, the snake. And so now, when he's gone out to the desert again and makes his magic circle to sit in, he starts having the vision. The snake comes back.
Once again.
And we've already seen the snake.
We've seen the snake, yes.
But so these are going to be the three temptations now, in the actual gospel stories, but done differently. And so you're saying that what does the snake have to say here?
Well, so the snake says that she created Eve. That's one of the fun things that the snake has to say. It doesn't really have the same temptations that we read in Scripture, like, turn stone into bread, jump off the temple because God's going to save you, and so on. So here it's a different take. So the snake here is having this crazy idea about the femininity, about women, about Eve, and I don't think it's Gnostic, but it's kind of Gnostic-like, this idea that the serpent here is encouraging or promoting a certain awakening. It's not the serpent of Genesis, that the serpent of Genesis is there to provoke disobedience.
Well, I guess the one place where it might overlap, and maybe what they're attempting to do, is that, as we're going to say, I don't want to, this is going to be a spoiler, but anyway, one of the temptations or seductions that is, away from like this God path to a fully normal human path, right? Mm-hmm. And so if the original snake in Eden, the result of everything that happened is that Eve started having children, and they had a family, and Adam had to go be a farmer and everything like that. In other words, he went from being, divine immortal beings living in a paradisical garden to being regular humans doing farm stuff and having kids and raising a family. That this first seduction is to, there's a regular life that you could be experiencing. You don't have to, wander around and thrive on the ground because you're hearing voices and things like that.
And that is probably what the serpent is doing here. I took it on the mystic.
Okay.
I took the mystic take to think, well, since we've seen the tree, and we've seen this this kind of tense yet not consummated relationship he has with Mary Magdalene, that maybe the snake is here showing like, well, I can awaken you to a true reality where, actually that's not a problem.
Yeah. Normative asks, why do we think that they've shuffled the timeline like this? In other words, why push John the Baptist and the temptations to kind of the middle instead of the beginning?
I don't know, because I haven't read the book, if this is how the book does it.
Yeah.
It is really, really strange, but I think the most important thing that we're seeing here is like the character of Jesus being developed. And so I think maybe what is happening here is there needs to be a Jesus that is this kind of naive preacher that's saying all these things that sound like really nice platitudes, but that actually have, at least in the ears of the audience, that they don't have any weight. They don't have anything that the audience can relate to. So I think it's part of that. He's a not very good kind of minister, apocalyptic preacher, and he has to go through this moment of transformation to become a different kind of preacher, which is what we will see later. He's not the same as before. And
the movie has 3 very distinct phases, and then there's the whole after part of the movie, the long ending of the movie. So he's had his first phase, he's about to have a second phase, and so maybe they needed something as a pivot point, and that's why they put it here. So after the snake, he's still sitting in his magic circle, and now Aslan comes to tempt him. The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. But I don't remember, what was Aslan about?
So he's the heart.
Okay.
So, and this is about, the ambition, power. One thing, if we go back to the snake, that what the snake offers is true what you said, that is like the very normal life.
Yeah.
Right? Because she almost sounds like Siduri in the Epic of Gilgamesh, that when Gilgamesh is seeking immortality, he goes to and finds this bar, and there's this bartender woman called Siduri, she's like a goddess, and famously she tells him, just drink and eat and be merry and just have a beautiful wife and have children and enjoy your family life, because that is your destiny. That's immortality is not for you.
Right.
And so that at some point I thought she sounded like this Siduri figure from the Epic of Gilgamesh. But then we move on to a little bit more. We get deeper into more ambitious. But he says that he's the heart, and or Jesus recognizes the lion as his heart.
Okay. But yeah, then he was talking about you were ambitious back when you were collaborating or something like that, and so
It's
you
about
can't tell us
power.
that you're not ambitious now. And then finally, Satan appears in a pillar of flame to him.
Yeah. And Jesus calls him archangel first.
Okay.
So that's where we see that Jesus sometimes gets confused. So
I guess the idea of it, in some of the
he's an archangel.
tradition is that Lucifer is an archangel.
Yeah, but yeah, it's not clear. He doesn't. Sometimes in the desert in Scripture, Jesus are going to say Satan, but here it's like it's a little bit more friendly tone. Oh, archangel.
Yeah.
And then
we have the vision again of the tree. And this time he eats from the tree. This is the one.
Yeah.
And it's immediately a bloody mess. So it's not a good, delightful fruit or anything like that. And so having experienced all this stuff, he now finds an axe, and he decides to take an axe to the tree, which I think is illustrating his new philosophy. So as we talked about, he had this philosophy of love that Judas didn't like, that the people weren't listening to, that John the Baptist didn't think much of. And so now that he's got this axe, he's got the new philosophy of the axe, as we'll see.
And I was trying to figure out, why this scene of Jesus cutting down the tree, this tree of temptation. What do you make of that? Because I see echoes, for example, of maybe Jesus cursing the barren fig tree or things like that, that Jesus getting mad at a tree. But I don't. The axe is a very interesting choice.
A lot of these, whenever you're going to have this kind of a phase in a Jesus character, this is when people go for the quote. I don't come to bring peace. I come with a sword. I come to light the world on fire. I wish it was already burning. These kind of quotes. And so these are there, but even with that, it's not. I don't come to bring peace. I come with an axe. And so it is kind of a weird that it gets pulled out of nowhere, because the axe is very prominent now in this whole phase of the movie. So Jesus leaves the desert. He comes back. He immediately goes to Mary and Martha's house and starts hanging out with them.
That was unexpected.
And we don't. I would have thought that we might have seen Lazarus here,
Right.
their brother, because then we would have at least been introduced to the guy alive, right? I don't think he's in. But I don't think we see him until later.
No,
when
we
he's
don't
dead.
see him until the
Lazarus scene.
the Lazarus.
So anyway, that was strange.
And I was wondering if this is supposed to be like this, the story in Luke, where he goes to the house and there's all these people, because there are certain elements in the dialogue between the two sisters and Jesus, that make it look a little bit like Martha is the busy one, but then it's not the same scene at all. This is not like this is supposed to be
They don't
like
do
a
that
really
whole-
nice house with like a big party with a lot of guests, as opposed to this barn with animals.
Right. Yeah. So it didn't. It's not that scene. They're just characters that they see him. So and I don't think they do very much here. But anyway, then we cut to the disciples who've been waiting at the edge of the desert for him. They're all arguing with each other whether he's ever going to come back and what they should all do, and pretty much most of them have no idea what they want to do, and maybe they want to leave and be done. And it's Judas who's really the strong one, who tells them, "Look, we're all waiting here. This is what we're doing." And Peter just says, "Sure, that's what we'll do." That's, as if the nominal leader, and then he makes fun of him. He says, "You're a rock, Peter. You get a brain like a rock," is kind of what he's trying to more or less saying.
That's why he's the rock. But here is clear. This is the leader of the bunch, and I think this is going back at the question: why is it that all the scenes are intentionally out of order? And I think this is important for the development here, that People are already just losing faith in Jesus as a leader. Everyone has doubt here. It's only Judas that pretty much says, we wait here.
Yeah.
And something happens. The Jesus that comes back is very different.
Right.
This is not
he's
like...
grown his hair out in the desert, for one thing. So he gets more crazy and his hair gets longer. And then, as he's talking, well, they were making their excuses that they weren't going to all abandon him or anything like that. Then he pulls his heart out. So he reaches into his own chest, pulls his heart out. And so this is, again, one of the supernatural things.
That's totally unnecessary. That's what? But he conveniently has the lowest V-neck in the history of cinema. But yeah, so it's just... So I don't...
So what did you make of that?
Well,
Because obviously this is not one of the, like a lot of things are again, this is one of those places where it's not based on the Gospels.
No, and I guess growing up as a Catholic, you see on the walls on your Catholic school and maybe in like at church, you see the Sacred Heart, Jesus imagery, and sometimes it almost, whoops, I'm not going to touch the microphone. And sometimes it almost looks like this Sacred Heart Jesus that has a visible heart, but the heart is in place. It
stays in there.
It's not in his hand.
Come out.
Sometimes the hand is a little bit close, but not. It's not supposed to be gruesome. It's supposed to, just portray like the sacrifice as opposed to this. I don't see anything other than just gruesomeness in this scene. I don't know why we need to see this.
I mean, it definitely then gives at this point, his disciples know he can do all kinds of crazy supernatural things. And so,
it made me think of the Indiana Jones movie that was.
Oh yeah.
It's only a couple years early. The Temple of Doom, I think, is like 1984 or something like that.
Okay.
Where you have this crazy shaman priest that is pulling hearts out of people, out of people's chests. So that's the first thing that came to mind.
So he now, though, tells them his new philosophy, which is that I, had believed in, God and love and so forth, but now I believe in the axe. Axe is the new gospel here, and so
that's a gospel.
And obviously, that's music to Judas's ears, who, because Judas has previously wanted more action, less talk of love, more.
Yeah.
And so.
And Jesus is very, very explicit. He says, it's war.
Yeah.
Those are his words. And here is something strange. Like Judas calls Jesus, when he falls at his feet and kisses his feet, he calls Jesus Adonai.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm pretty certain that in the Gospels that's never
he doesn't say Lord.
Lord,
right?
But not the Lord. I guess I never thought of why would in a movie that is all English, why would they choose the one word Adonai when everyone is casually saying the word God, but now in this moment they don't say Master, they don't say Lord. It's very explicit Adonai.
Yeah. Well, they throw in rabbi all the time.
They say rabbi all the time, but rabbi...
Even when it's not a rabbi, they call the high priest a rabbi and things like that. Anyway, they do that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It is strange. So but anyway, now we have essentially there's other places in the Gospels where Peter identifies, Christ as the Christ, as the Messiah or something like that, or where people identify Jesus, with a kind of a testimonial point. But this one is now put into Judas, and it's because he's now we're to the phase of Jesus where the gospel is acts.
But is in the Gospels when people, when Jesus questions the disciples, so who do people say that I am? And it's Peter who finally says, well, you are the Messiah.
Right.
And here is like the only one who really, or at least the one who first understands is Judas.
Right, no,
Judas
exactly,
is the
yeah,
one who
that's
understands that, yeah, no, this dude here who just came out of the desert, that's God.
Yeah. So, so God is inside us, Satan is outside. It's one of the teachings now.
That is, again, there's all these theology that is really a theology of this storyline. It has nothing to do with scripture or later theology. If you think of the Gospel of Thomas or Luke, where the idea is that, that God is within you, around you,
and outside of you.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but here,
like you're saying, this kind of dualism.
The
that they've set up
dualism, yeah.
That as he's having this particular battle. All right. So next we go off to do spiritual battles. He's got these supernatural powers now, and it doesn't have to only involve pulling his own heart out of his chest, but he's now going to start healing people. So they come to this place where there's all these people possessed by demons that are in pits. And I was thinking that this reminded me of the place right outside Jerusalem in the life of Brian where there's this guy hiding in a pit, and Brian goes and finds him, and there's an old man who'd taken a vow of silence and he hadn't spoken for decades and things like that, and Brian steps on his foot and he talks, and so then he doesn't want to stop talking after he broke his vow. And so it's this old man with the juniper berries, the miracle of the juniper bushes. But anyway, so I just wondered if, based on the fact that both the life of Brian and this movie have people off living in pits like this, if there must be something. We haven't seen the greatest story ever told or whatever we saw. It wasn't in King of Kings, but I feel like there's got to be, this image has got to be found in one of these old Jesus classics that we haven't seen yet, and maybe we'll find the source of these pit people.
I don't know. But again, we have here like all this erotic kind of imagery around Jesus. All these possessed people are once again just jumping naked at him, and some of them have pretty reasonable bodies. They're just dirty, which is something that Scorsese really was very adamant to make sure that everything in this movie looks dirty.
Yeah.
Like from everyone, the Romans, the followers of Jesus, everyone has to be dirty.
Yeah, so he's definitely, there's mud-covered people that he's casting demons out of, and that's causing him to have these sort of ecstatic experiences. And then he specifically, somebody who's very physically, obviously blind, there's a clear supernatural thing that happens here as this guy is given sight, his eyes are healed and made perfect.
Right away.
And then Judas goes around and so did everybody see that? Here, look at these miracles we got going here. This guy was blind. So Judas is off publicizing the miracles here.
I thought he was first going to say that he was seeing trees or something, because this is a scene where it's a very kind of shamanistic magic kind of way of healing the blind person with spit and dust. But
that's in the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
All right, so then we go to a wedding scene, which once again has lots of wild music. It's very orientalized again. All these tattoos that continue to distract me throughout the entire movie. The bridegroom is being carried around on a litter. You can only see the bottom of his feet here because he's standing on top of it as these guys are running around and clapping. And
it looks like a fun wedding.
So it's a big wedding, and there's a confrontation. So an old guy does not want Jesus is showing up with Judas and Mary Magdalene, and the old guy doesn't think Mary Magdalene should come there because she's a prostitute. And so Jesus confronts him in not a very compelling argument. We're all family or whatever it was.
Yeah, clearly the experience in the desert, or maybe the second experience, the 40 days in the desert, didn't make Jesus more eloquent. He's still not a very good preacher, but somehow he persuades this man that it's okay for Mary Magdalene to attend.
Well, the host is also saying it's my wedding, and I say that they can come. So this guy doesn't really have anything to stand on. But anyway, so they're hanging out. They're having a wedding. Of course, they run out of wine. They only had enough wine for 2 days. This party, it continues on and on and on. And then Jesus just kind of flippantly says, "Wow, check out those water jugs. I think you might find some in there."
And that again, if the baptism, yes, his hair is getting more luxurious. I agree. But if the baptism scene was a little underwhelming here too, it's like this miracle is a non-miracle. It's just like something that it just happens.
I think it was clear that
the scenes.
No, I know. I think it's clear that he did it.
Well, of course he did it. Of course he did it.
Because I was like over there and it's wine, and then he kind of just winks at him like like this cocky miracle
it's a cool
guy.
Jesus.
I don't know. It's such a weird.
This is a Jesus that everyone wants, right?
It's a strange take, and then he just starts dancing dancing up a storm. Everybody's doing weird stuff.
This is the Jesus you want, when the LCBO is closed here in Ontario. It's just like, yeah, no, just that bottle of water. Look again.
And Kate Tempest Bradford said, from this point on, Jesus is going around telling everybody that he's God a lot, which doesn't happen in the Synoptics, especially anyway. So.
But even in John, it's not so obvious like this.
Yeah.
Like the way he does it, and maybe that's why it's not very persuasive. But the great crazy thing about this scene is that the mother of Jesus in the Gospel of John account of the wedding at Cana, it has a very important role. She's the one that first notices that, that tells Jesus, do something.
Right.
And Jesus is like, oh, mother, just get out of here. This is not my time. But the mother still is the one that tells everyone to do as Jesus says. But the mother is not here.
It's a completely different context. It's like a weird, anyway. They just knew that Jesus turns water into wine at a wedding, and they had a wedding, and here we are. So then they decide to go to Nazareth. So they go back, speaking of his mother and hometown. And he, again, is a terrible preacher. and so all of the people in Nazareth are not interested at all. They want him to perform a trick or something like that. He won't do it. And so he's like promising them, hey, you're my homies. This is my hometown. Come with me. We're going to build a whole new kingdom, and you're on board. You got a ticket.
He says something again that is not scriptural, that he promises people a new ark.
Yeah, that's right. So now it's like the world is going to be destroyed. You can get on the ark with me. Right,
and it's again that drives me crazy a little bit, because he's talking about definitely like an ark, a new ark of Noah kind of thing. But then there's another ark, that is the Ark of the Covenant. And so we do have within the theology that
the
Paul
old covenant is in the ark, or had been.
Right. But then Jesus in the writings of Paul is presented as a new covenant, not as a new ark.
Got it.
So that's when I think some ideas are just out of place here, or just using one word but not the other, and that doesn't make any sense.
The Ark of the Covenant is different from Noah's Ark.
Right.
So anyway.
But he's
definitely
gets talking
rejected.
About a boat to save people.
Gets rejected in his hometown, which that does happen in the scriptures. But actually, one of the things that does happen too is that the people in Nazareth are saying, get his family here, because this guy's insane. Which is one thing that happens in the Gospel of Mark. So anyway, then his mother does come, and he has this very big rejection of her. He's already told everybody in the new Gospel of the Acts phase that they need to all reject reject any family that they might have, and he does that too by saying, "Who are you? Who are you?" to his mother. Although the woman that she's with, I don't know who that is.
I don't know who that is, but she tells her, it's all good, don't worry.
He was with all these angels, so this is all divine. And she's like, really? I wish he wasn't with them. So she would have rather. So Mary, the mother of Jesus, would rather have him have a regular life than this.
Right,
life.
and this is the thing I think that we're supposed to take out of this scene where, this.
She's like a temptation away back into human life.
She is one of the temptations, and that's why he's so harsh with her. But it's a little bit too dramatized to make that point.
Well, also because you're empathizing with her,
You're
as opposed to
definitely,
thinking
yes.
about him being tempted by her or whatever.
Right.
Because he's, I have to say, for me anyway, he is a character that was hard for me to get a lot of sympathy for, or feeling for, or interest in, because he's all over the place.
But I think that's deliberate, and we see that in the reaction that everyone around him has, except Judas. Judas is the one that okay,
Yeah, loves the guy.
I
He's
have
with
to keep
him
helping
forever.
this guy. He believes in Jesus. But it's all the more striking to me that this really harsh scene, the rejection of Jesus' mother, happens right after this wedding where she's supposed to be, but she's not there.
Right.
That is conflating all the different gospel stories into this very strange, as a result, storyline.
Aries Aurelian asks, going back to that wedding scene that we were just talking about, is there a Dionysian theme there? Something like, Dionysus, I guess, is present anytime there's wine, but he doesn't get that crazy.
I don't think so, because we don't see this kind of
nobody's
practices
super
that
drunk
happen.
or
Yeah.
anything. Yeah, it's pretty tame, especially compared to other things that they've already been to, like everything from the sex show was pretty tame compared to John the Baptist's crazy thing that was going on. But anyway, so there's already been a lot more wild stuff than the wedding. So,
But I don't think there's an intention of showing that wedding as something pagan. It's just, this is what this imagined Israel is like in
they even did a ceremony where supposedly quoting the law of Moses or whatever as they're exchanging rings and things. So this immediately moves to Bethany, and they're at the raising of Lazarus. So he arrives, the sisters are in mourning, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days, I guess, and now we're here again.
And it's crazy, right? Because the wedding at Cana in John happens at the beginning, it's chapter 2.
Yeah.
And then this happens just before the Passion.
Although we're probably getting close to the Passion. It's that the problem is that the wedding at Cana got pushed back.
Right. I mean, so that's. But the point is, it's the whole thing is like the whole order of how Jesus' ministry worked is totally just out of place, just to really develop the character here.
Yeah. So they, orders them to open the tomb up. It's a terrible stench that comes forth from that, and he has a big theatrical incantation-like prayer, and it's a much bigger struggle.
He does something with his hands.
Yeah. But eventually the dead guy comes out, Lazarus comes forth.
And again, it's totally devoid of this symbolic richness that we read in John, where the two sisters, one by one, are going to go to Jesus and say, "Oh, had you been here, he would not have died." So this is not in the movie. And then in the movie, Jesus just says, "Lazarus, come forth."
No, in the book, he says.
In the Gospels.
In the Gospels.
In the Gospels, Jesus just says, "Lazarus, come forth," or "come out." But here, it's a struggle.
And and they go through all these formulas that are magic formulas. So by the prophet Elijah, by all these kind of things. Every time we're kind of getting into that a magic being cast.
So it is very much like magic incantations of this era, that you start mentioning big figures, either of the Jewish tradition, or sometimes you can mention Greek philosophers for your incantation, depending on what you are. Sometimes all these incantations are all in the same book.
Right. Yeah.
But that's what Jesus is saying here.
But and the other thing about it is that I think the movie assumes that the point of doing this is to have a show of the magic power, essentially, because there's no other real reason for doing it. And whereas there was a philosophical point about defeating death and things like that, in the Gospel of John, which is, but I'm just saying that because the struggle here is between Jesus's human and divine halves, that this is, it doesn't have that as its point. As far as,
And especially because Jesus, once this magic thing works, he seems a little shocked. When
That it happened.
Lazarus, when Lazarus goes and hugs him, I don't know if Jesus makes this face because supposedly he stinks, or because he's shocked that he actually is
worked.
alive.
Yeah. Okay, so then they go now to the temple. They go to Jerusalem, and this is kind of the big long corridor. I wrote in my notes when I got to this that I felt like this is the first time they really built a set in this movie. In other words, because there's so many of the others that have just been in, I don't know, very, very meager places before. But I also, anyway, I found that the settings weren't that impressive in this movie. And including even this one.
And you know what? Something important to note here at this point is that at the end of the scene of the raising of Lazarus in the Gospel of John, you have the Jewish authorities who start plotting to kill Jesus, which we don't see that in the movie.
No, I mean they're not doing that.
They're not doing that.
He's gonna, because as we'll see when we get to it, he actually has to plot in order to get them to be interested in killing him.
Right.
So anyway, but in the temple here, one of the things that happens is we have the statue of Caesar in the temple, at the gate of the temple. This is something that didn't happen.
Yeah, there's no primary sources naming this thing.
Well, in other words, there's this idea that Caligula was going to, order this to happen,
right?
But that he ended up dying before it did happen, and both Josephus and Philo, I think, explain that had it happened, that would have caused the Jewish revolt much earlier. So,
but in any event, it would have been later, not.
Oh yeah, but that's still what it. Yeah, in Caligula's reign, as opposed
Caligula,
to
not
Tiberius's reign, which is when Jesus is alive. So anyway, there's no. So is that Caligula? It can't be. It must be Augustus, right?
It's probably supposed to be Augustus. Yeah, I don't know.
All right. So in any event, this is the temple. The temple's really bloody, and again, as they're pouring all the blood from the sacrifices down the drain, they have dogs lapping it up. So if there's sacred sacrificial temple blood, I don't think that unclean animals like dogs are running around, but it's again part of this, I don't know, this weird orientalizing thing, and also making the blood sacrifice especially bloody. There is also, of course, the money changers, and so Jesus encounters one of these money changers, and who insists that everything that the trading is very fair.
Everything is fair.
And so that leads to overturning all the tables, and as we might expect, but which quickly leads to a confrontation with the high priest and the other temple priests, who come out and act very reasonably and say, "What are you doing?" And they have an argument where Jesus is increasingly unhinged as he's kind of yelling that he's God at these guys, and they're kind of yelling back, "Look. This is how this works. There's we have, according to the law, we pay a temple tax. We can't pay a temple tax with Roman coins because they all of them have graven images of gods on the coin, and that is against the first commandment or whatever. In other words, and so that's why we have outside the temple here we have these money changers, and it's that's the system, and and Jesus is kind of like saying, "I'm God."
I just felt like that, today when I had to exchange money for my trip.
Okay.
So I totally get it. I totally get it why you would get so angry with the money changers, but yeah, this is like, if you thought that maybe all these visions and powers of Jesus are just in his head and he's mentally unstable, here in this scene, he's out of himself.
Well, and this is definitely where he does the "I've come not to bring peace, but the sword" line, and so on.
And another thing here is like the temple just looks so run down.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be the temple of Herod. It's supposed to look like an ornate, monumental Greek temple.
Right.
And it just
This is essentially
looks very, very dirty and old, but not very well maintained.
And he kind of ends up by saying essentially, God's not an Israelite, and
that's when everyone reacts.
And it's also again one of these things that happens, in a lot of these movies that I think is still a problem, where we have these Jesuses who are blonde, and then when they're talking to by the way, who is still Jewish, and who, when he's talking to the priests and things like that, they could have had all these priests be blonde too then, as long as you were doing it. But instead, they tend to look more Jewish, stereotypically Jewish-like. And then our blonde Jesus is yelling things like "God's not an Israelite" and things like that. And it's sort of a weird. It ends up making the choice. I don't know.
Well, even his disciples are, not.
Judas has red hair. Hybrid
Right.
Keitel's not particularly Jewish seeming, I think.
Oh yeah. He says, "I'm a saint of blasphemy."
Yeah. So
Among
this is
other-
part of, like I
other
say, increasingly
provocative
unhinged things, but he's able to, there he is, being the saint of blasphemy. And then, though he's able to, despite having caused all this commotion, he is able to kind of leave and with no consequences.
Yeah, this one, after this confrontation, I guess,
They all go off.
no problem.
Yeah. Then a very weird thing happens. So on the way out of town, Judas meets this guy, Harry Dean Stanton.
His name is not revealed
No.
at this point, but it appears to, be someone that Judas already knows very well.
Well, essentially, the idea of it is that Judas is a zealot. At some point or other, we have this revealed that they're zealots, and that this is a fellow zealot. He's saying, "Yeah, Judas, what are you doing? We sent you to kill this guy, and here you are following him around, like you're taking him to be a prophet and so on." And Judas is explaining, "I'm following this guy forever. I'm not following you guys anymore," and this kind of a thing. And although we don't hear who this guy is, we should probably mention it because it is weird.
Yes, it's worth mentioning that this is Saul. I mean, we hear that he's Saul here. I don't know if his name is mentioned
It's not mentioned
here.
yet here. He mentions it later when we see him later. So this is Saul who becomes Paul, or Saul whose Roman name is Paul, although they present it in the movie as a transition when he becomes Paul. Anyway, so this is the Apostle Paul, who did not ever meet the historical Jesus,
Or the historical Judas.
or presumably the historical Judas. Yeah, he didn't, because he would have mentioned that. I think so.
And in fact, according to Paul, he's not going to meet at least James and Peter and John until after all these events.
Yeah. Okay. K. Tempest Bradford says, "There's an aspect of this book that I found interesting, but I didn't like. So Mary here, I think Mary, the mother of Jesus, is who we're talking about. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is very pushed to the side. However, it's made clear there's no special birth. Mary's wanting her son to be normal, to give her grandbabies, and that's because there was no angel telling her that Jesus was God's baby. He's explicitly Joseph's son." So I think that you're right, Kate Tempest Bradford. I think that's why, like in that confrontation he has with Mary, that she's a temptation to him to the human side, right? And so the battle here in the book and in the movie is that Jesus is battling between, is he God, or is he going to be tempted to have just a regular human life? And Mary, the mother of Jesus, is one of the people that is pulling him towards family and obligation. And then he's telling his disciples, you have to cast off family and obligation if we're going to do divine stuff.
But that dualism that is foretold at the beginning of the movie is also this idea of like the conflict between things of the world and spiritual things.
Yeah.
And so the conflict also is, I don't know if it's only exclusively for Jesus, am I a God or am I a normal guy trying to live his life, or it's supposed to be something that we should all relate to.
But I don't know if we all need to. We'll see. But I feel like it's actually a special thing that he's supposed to do.
Oh, I guess your spirituality is very easy then. You don't have to give up anything to be spiritual.
Well, I'm just saying what he has to do is this very particular thing, as we'll see in the movie. I don't know how universal it is. So next crazy thing. So Paul, the Apostle Paul here, the zealot in this movie, next goes to Lazarus and stabs him in order to eliminate, I guess, the evidence, as Judas later says, to eliminate the evidence of Jesus' greatest miracle and things like that, because he wants to undermine Jesus.
Lazarus doesn't seem to be very happy to be alive.
He asks Lazarus, what was it like? You were actually dead and everything like that. That's something that doesn't exist in the Gospels, even though you'd think that that's something would be a natural follow-up if it was an actual thing that happened. And Lazarus is just like, it's the same. It was the same to be dead as it is to be alive. So it was the same again, I guess, once he was dead again after Paul stabs him. So.
And I guess this is the beginning of Paul persecuting Christians.
Yeah. So this is, I guess, the backstory for Paul then persecuting all these Christians early, though, before Jesus is even dead. So we next have another vision that Jesus has. A seer comes and shows him the suffering servant prophecy from Isaiah, and so he's able to read himself, as the suffering servant.
Yeah.
From Isaiah.
This is a seer that happens to be Scorsese, apparently.
So this is how he's entered into his own movie.
Yeah.
There's a little cameo there.
And it brings to Jesus this words of Isaiah that is pretty much like the emotional pinnacle of Handel's Messiah. Like he was despised, rejected, and with his stripes we are healed, and all those things. And this is like when Jesus realizes, oh, this is talking about me. All right, I'm in.
So this movie has gone on for a long time at this point. so now there's another little discussion here with Judas, because what are we having? So,
but here is where Jesus tells Judas that he's got all these things, all these voices. He hears voices. He sees all these shadows, and this is when he starts to understand that he needs to die.
Okay, that's right.
And because this is after it's just seeing like this whole idea of the suffering servant, which technically the suffering servant is Israel, is not Jesus. But in Christians, repurposing Isaiah, see the suffering servant who has to suffer and be rejected and humiliated, and through his suffering and blood, the whole salvation happens. That is repurposed to mean like the figure of Jesus here.
That's
and
right.
So after this is when he tells Judas, I have to die.
I've got a new plan, yeah. So that's right. Now that I'm getting, so the same way that John the Baptist, talking to John the Baptist and going off into the desert and seeing Satan, this seer coming in this vision is another one of these pivot points. Mm-hmm. So the Jesus in the Gospel of the Acts, that's over now. And now we're to the Jesus, marching towards the cross. In other words, he knows that he's going to be the one that suffers and dies. And so he's kind of revealing that to Judas, who does not like that. Judas was on board with the middle phase. That was what he wanted the whole time. And now it's the opposite. So now they're going to go back to Jerusalem again in order to try to provoke that, I guess, because Jesus wants to be killed now as part of the whole deal.
And his v-neck keeps getting lower, I think.
Meanwhile, I was taken by how all the other disciples do not have any idea what they're doing. So like Nathaniel here is the guy with the beard, and so he's was a shepherd. And
they both have beards.
Oh, I'm sorry, the guy on the left, the Viking guy. So anyway, Nathaniel, and so he's just saying when they have a new Jerusalem and a new world, he just wants his sheep back, because he doesn't know what happened to his sheep because Jesus made him give away all his stuff. And he wants to have more sheep, and he does not have to watch them. He wants to have a bunch of shepherds work for him. So he really doesn't get what this is about, I think. And so a lot of them all have weird ideas like this. The other guy here, I don't remember which apostle he is, just wants to be able to worship in the temple, really worship in the temple without the Romans around, and so on. Thomas is saying, I'm not going to sit. I'm not dying for this, So they're all sort of on board. Peter's worried. is this all the people we're coming with? Are there going to be more people helping out by the time if we're having this revolution?
Which is a good question.
Yeah, but Jesus doesn't answer him. So they come in.
Now it happens.
So you were waiting. Was there not going to be Palm Sunday?
Like, what happened to the Palm Sunday? No, already we had the scene with the money changers.
Right.
And yet, did we skip this scene?
Again,
no.
It's just out of order.
Now.
Everything's out of order, as
unless this is, I don't know, either in the movie or the book, we're suggesting that there are two instances of this incident in the temple.
Right.
The one in the Gospel of John happens very early.
Right.
And it's only in the Synoptics that happened just, as at the beginning of the Passion. So maybe the storyline is treating these as two different instances of troublemaker Jesus at the temple.
I think it could be that, but I don't know. I think you're giving it a lot of credit for that. But I think that what's happened is that they've transposed that. They have the early money changer scene, and now, because I don't think that he overturns some tables here, but actually once we kind of get, there's all the palm fronds, everybody's here, this quickly devolves into just looting. Mm-hmm. So they, as opposed to just over, I think the money changer scene was the earlier one, because I think this one is just, let's go ahead and have a revolution. Let's overturn everybody's stalls, the basket makers, and let's just destroy everything and burn everything down and that kind of a thing. And so it quickly, this is not. So I think that maybe the other one was the money changer scene, and this is some kind of a different revolution scene that is about to happen. But when they get to the center, and Jesus is supposed to give them the word that they're all going to kill everybody or whatever and overturn everything, they come on, just tell us, give us the word, and he won't do it. He's sort of stuck in the middle of things where he wants to be the suffering servant and get killed, as opposed to the axe guy that he was in the middle thing. So he's already moved on from where they all are.
Okay, Tempest adds that in the book he storms the temple once and very ineffectively.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. All right. So essentially, the revolution's over. Judas is once again able to just walk away with this guy. So the Romans and the temple guards or whatever, they all kind of come in and start killing or stopping all of the rebels. But again, they don't catch Jesus or any of the ringleaders, who are able to just walk away. Again. So. And
this happens here. This just hesitation of Jesus at this moment, right after he literally says, God is here, I am here.
Yeah. So no, he's definitely.
And when he sees the temple guard that is starting to surround all the perimeter of the temple, that's when all of a sudden he flicks out, and it has to be good old Judas who has to be the one, as always, the man of action, the one who actually walks him out.
Right. Yeah. So then they have another big sit-down talk, and this is where Jesus now tells him the new kind of plan, and that plan is that Judas has to betray him.
Is it at this moment? I don't know if you have a slide for that he gets like stigmata.
Oh, I don't think I got that.
So someone said I just read that we should do stigmata next, but this is a stigmata moment here because Jesus' hands start bleeding.
Right. So there are a couple times where we have this prefiguring. So now we're in this walking towards the cross, and so Jesus is talking about he's going to die on the cross. That's the plan, and Judas has got to do it, and it's what's crazy. Judas doesn't want to do it. He wanted to do it. Judas ultimately says, "Look, God gave you the harder job.
Right.
Betraying me is going to be the harder job that you got to do than being crucified." So the film really is a positive Judas, who's a good guy who loves Jesus.
There's no doubt.
Want to do these things,
that's a good guy, and he weeps.
Yeah.
Right. In the Lazarus scene, something that a lot of people like about that scene is this famous just verse, like Jesus wept.
That's right.
Right, and Jesus doesn't
weep in the movie
yeah. But here is like it's Judas the one that's like, oh.
Judas wept. Yeah. So there he is. He's weeping. So next we have a contrast between the temple Passover scene, where again there's all these blood sacrifices and all these little animals that they're killing and all the blood and guts and everything like that. And then that's immediately contrasted with
intense music also.
Intense music, orientalized stuff again. And that's contrasted with the Last Supper scene, the Christian replacement for blood sacrifice, the bread and the wine that are shared. At the very end, I think the wine does turn into blood, right?
At the end, the wine, has the viscosity of blood.
Yeah.
And I think those are the hands of Judas at the end.
Who's seeing it? Who's doing it? I think it's not. It's another apostle. Maybe you're right. One
of the things that, this contrast between the serene Last Supper scene and then like the noisy, very strange ritual that is happening at the temple for the Passover, made me think of the book of Hebrews, the epistle to the Hebrews. And I don't know if it's just accidental or deliberate, this idea that, Jesus is here to replace the whole thing. Jesus is the ultimate priest that is going to offer the definitive sacrifice once and for all.
Right.
And the wine here, he says, this is my blood, and very visually the wine turns to blood once they pass the wine through the whole circle.
Yeah.
Paralleling like all the blood that we saw in this same back and forth scene at the temple.
Yeah, I mean they're getting covered with blood in the temple, including that's why they have to run them all through the mikveh baths continuously, and there's just all that kind of crazy stuff. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's definitely the contrast that's happening here. So then we go to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is crying and praying and all of this.
Now he cries.
Thing, yeah. And so and this is where I'm just going to say I'm putting my cards on the table here on this. I know this movie is actually done very well on Rotten Tomatoes, so it's got like a 84% and things like that. So I think people largely like this movie, including critics. But
it had good reception by critics. Good reception.
And so it's like 82% for critics, 84% for people, whatever it is on Rotten Tomatoes. But I still was not able to get into the character or invested in the character. And so when he's having his emotional moments, I just was kind of writing down, I'm not invested in the character. He cries, I'm not feeling anything because I bought into that. That's what I was writing in my notes.
He doesn't even cry. He really has a nervous breakdown in this scene.
Yeah. Well, this is again,
even though this is the new plan.
Yeah. So, I cried a little bit. All right. So when that is all happening, then the answer, is, what can I avoid this fate and things like that? And one of his apostles seemingly brings him a cup and he drinks from it, and which makes him realize that that's the path that he has to have, because this in fact is not the apostle.
This is not the apostle, right?
It's a visionary or heavenly being that is looking like the apostle because that apostle is sleeping.
Which is from Luke.
Which is, what's happening in the synoptics where the three
there
apostles
is an angel,
an angel
that comes and offers the cup.
Right. In Luke. I thought you meant the sleeping guys. That's in all three of them. So there we are. So then they wake up and he says, well, it's too late to worry about it now because now Judas is here with all the guards to betray him. Judas betrays him with a kiss. That immediately makes Peter go nuts. He takes his knife out and cuts one of the guards' ears off.
And cuts it in half. I thought it was like sliced off. I was like,
so right down the middle.
That's not how I always imagined it happened.
But it was pretty graphic. So then Jesus picks it up, and then again one of these, not shying away from supernatural stuff, attaches it to the guy's ear, and it is perfectly healed and doing that. And I presumed that the way they did that was by reversing it, so they started with in terms of the special effects, but anyway, so they played the film backwards as they took a prosthetic ear and pulled it off. But anyway, that's how I presumed it happened. But in any event, he heals him in a very convincing miracle that Judas again sees, and so Judas is still totally on board with knowing who Jesus is and all this kind of thing. And then they decide to take him to trial. And so what happens next, Leandro?
Well, at the end of the scene, it's just like you imagine, if you think of like the other two movies we mentioned, the Passion of the Christ and King of Kings, like this whole complicated thing that is the trial.
Right.
And
or all the trials, because actually in I think both movies they send him off to Herod. They both send him off to Herod Antipas, because of that detail in Luke, which is not in the other one. So anyway, there's big, long, elaborate trials.
It gets tedious. So at this point, I was thinking, oh my God, we're going to be for the next 2 hours with trials. But
instead, they take him to Pontius Pilate with his horse.
This is the best part of the movie, I thought.
So who is Pontius Pilate?
So people in 1988, people had seen this character with really, really tight pants in Labyrinth.
Yeah.
So I don't think I didn't see this movie back then, but it would have been impossible not to think of David Bowie as in
the king in the Labyrinth.
Yeah, this evil king in Labyrinth.
So it is interesting that this coat casting choice. So David Bowie is here, and he's Pilate, and he has this kind of pretty casual sit-down conversation. Like a trial without having any Pilate's guards or anything like that. He might as well be talking to, again, a cosmic archangel or Lucifer. Essentially the king of the labyrinth or whatever, because he doesn't require guards or anything around him, anything like that. And he has a whole bunch of really strange conversation.
He's very confident, I have to say.
Very confident.
I'm kind of scared.
And so, for whatever reason, Jesus starts quoting from Daniel to him. So he's telling him about Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue, the different gold and mud.
Yeah, this dream of the 4 metals of Daniel that Daniel interprets for Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
And the feet are of clay, and then there's a hand that is not a human hand that knocks down.
Cuts a stone out.
Right.
A stone cut without hands is then set forth and rolls and knocks it down. And David Bowie's like, yeah, well, that's Rome, right? Okay, I got it.
Again, this is dude.
He's like,
you're not a very impressive preacher.
But he says, you are more dangerous than the zealots.
Yeah.
Because we know how to handle those guys. So anyway, so I thought it was strange for him to quote Daniel here. I mean, so it's not like that Jesus doesn't, use the Daniel imagery.
Right.
So for example, all of the places where instead of using personal pronouns, Jesus says, the Son of Man will do this. The Son of Man is an imagery from the book of Daniel. You will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds or seated at the right hand of God and things like that. So that imagery is there, but not this this particular dream. And so it is a strange thing.
Which is fun, but there are other things that are really fun about this scene with Pilate, this whole philosophical argument about what truth is.
Yeah. He says, I come to bear witness to the truth or whatever, and the Pilate's like, what is truth?
So
in other words, that's a great. He's got some great lines in all of the Gospels, and we don't have. David Bowie doesn't use those lines. He's got his own lines. So anyway.
But David Bowie is a really, really confident Pilate, unlike the very hesitant, undecisive Pilate that we see in the Gospels and definitely in the movies.
Yeah.
In other movies.
Yeah. So it's an interesting choice.
So this is more like a ruthless Pilate that Josephus writes about. He's totally not interested in Jewish custom or following it or respecting it at all. He's just like, this is a problem. Boom, I'm gonna fix it.
Yeah. And in the end, he's like, well, we got a place on Golgotha for you. I think there's 20,000 skulls up there.
I think he only says 3,000.
No, 3,000 skulls.
Yeah.
But then he says, I wish you people, and I'm sure he means the Jews, I wish you people would go and count it someday so that you might learn a lesson or whatever. It's kind of a weird choice. Anyway, so they send him off to be tortured. And it is pretty grim torture. It's not quite the Mel Gibson, but there is a lot of torture.
But after we've seen that Mel Gibson's take on this is like...
It's less than it. Yeah. It's more than King of Kings. But,
That's a
crown.
really cool crown.
Yeah, it's a cool crown, and this becomes the main image, right?
Yeah.
For the movie. Then they do the whole, way of the cross. And it's during this, since the trial was so truncated, is while this is happening, that this is where Peter's denial of Jesus happens.
Right, it happens here as opposed to like during the trial.
Right.
But also the trial totally removes the trial in this movie, any participation from the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
Here is just something that Pilate says, let's do it, bam, my signature here, get it done. And this is why I was mentioning, like, they don't mention that it is the Jewish authorities at the end of the scene of Lazarus that plot to kill him, because it's almost like, here, like, there's not a lot of involvement of the Jewish authorities in accusing or condemning this Jesus.
They had in the first temple cleansing, they had a big confrontation, and once he kept on saying, I'm God, they said, well, that's the kind of thing that's going to get you killed,
right?
Or whatever. So they were at least to that amount. But yeah, it is weird because there's no indication about how the power structure works here, right? Mm-hmm. So the Romans have a statue of Caesar in the middle of the temple, and once they betray Jesus, he just goes straight to Pilate. And so how is Pilate connected to any of the other authority structures is not clear, And in fact, actually, since none of the Roman guards are wearing any distinctively Roman outfits, you can't tell if they're supposed to be temple guards or Romans or anything like that,
But if you compare that to this very dramatic scene that Mel Gibson really exaggerates with...
I'm glad that's not it.
Right.
So anyway,
but this dramatic moment when the people say, it's on our blood.
Right.
So you get zero of that here,
which is good. I don't want that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he's carrying the cross through. Goes
and
to
now
Golgotha.
He himself does it, not the guy who crafted this beam. But in this, like at the beginning of the movie, like he does it himself, and here is like
in the Gospel of John, as opposed to in the other Gospels where they get Simon of Cyrene to do it.
And so here he gets now to experience in his own body this thing that was
traumatized,
a cause of trauma back then, because back then he was just participating in this oppression. Now he is the oppressed.
Yeah. And he wonders where everybody's gone. They've all abandoned him and everything like that. And, some gruesome nail driving. And then being put up on the cross. And I was saying at this point, so he's like crucified next to two other guys who are just being crucified on trees. Mm-hmm. And considering how much the Romans spent on having crossmaker at the beginning of this, they're not using them in all cases. So anyway, I guess they crucified the crossmakers, so they don't have enough of them anymore. So there's where this is happening. I was seeing that more or less is just a guy jeering him.
Yeah, I don't know what this guy was about.
So essentially, then it starts to become like this whole cosmic scene starts to swell, where it's sort of seeing like Matthew, thing on the cross, where like we had that in King of Kings, I think, too, where there was a big storm and the temple.
Yeah, but here is, once again, there's no earthquake or the veil at the temple that is torn at this moment or anything like that. It's just, I guess he's still alive.
Well, there's this cosmic thing that starts to happen, though. You feel like that's about to happen.
But the wind is a little, like, and this mighty wind, is this something that happens in Scripture? I don't think so.
No, it's in Matthew.
Okay.
I mean, there's something like that. So in other words, you think that it's building towards that, but then something completely unexpected happens.
Yes. And there was talk about we have to spend at least 10 minutes talking about this girl.
Okay.
Which, you understand, okay, this is not just a girl, right? Because like she's a little creepy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's very clear right away that nobody else can see her, and she's definitely, anyway. So she's definitely, it doesn't take very long for you to understand that this is an angel. She identifies herself as an angel.
And this angel only appears, at least this self-identified angel, only appears after Jesus already has gone through a transformation while hanging on the cross.
Yeah.
Because he starts really distressed, visibly expressing the pain and the fear, and eventually we get all this wind and all this chaos, and then there's a moment of silence.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we no longer hear anything. We see like all the Marys, and the Mary the mother, Salome, and two more Marys, conflating all of those Marys, but not John at the cross. So right
at this, that's what I was trying to say. At this dramatic moment, that's when now everything that you were about to think the climax is here, and then suddenly, no. There's a completely change into the story where this angel comes, and she more or less says, all right, you've done all that you had to do. And so she starts pulling God's happy with you. Don't you remember that story with Abraham where Abraham had to sacrifice?
They almost sacrifice.
It was supposed to Abraham's son Isaac, but then at the last minute an angel was sent, to stop it and so on. Well, I'm that angel. I'm your guardian. Your guardian angel, and God is really pleased with you, and so you don't actually have to die. You've already done what we had to do. So everything.
Who appears right after he says, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" No, no. You haven't been forsaken, Jesus. Here's your angel, just like Abraham at that moment. At the right moment, the sacrifice is prevented.
And so all the people still see him on the cross, even though he's not there. So in this way, it's sort of like the Docetist vision of Christianity, where the cross is laughing that the enemies of the light have been fooled and tricked and things like that, because the true Jesus is not, actually
suffering there physically.
And so now the angel is able to say, that's all past, but there's a kind of a pivotal question he asks. So, I'm not the Messiah, and then the angel's like, no, you're not.
Oh, all right, no biggie.
And so from a movie that has been universally set in like desert, they walk into this kind of completely green land.
Yeah.
There's a wedding party approaches. Who's getting married?
It's the first time we see this kind of.
Yeah, suddenly it's a greenery,
valley. And then this is when you realize, wow, the whole movie was dust and brick and clay.
Yeah.
And now it's all green.
And so, Jesus is able to marry Magdalene. Mary. And she washes all his wounds, all the blood off, and that also washes away the wounds. They're a married couple. They're able to have children, or at least she gets pregnant.
And this is one of the scenes that apparently upset a lot of Christians, because there's a scene where they have sex, and
it's pretty tame.
It's
Anyway, but then she dies.
Yeah, she sees a bright light.
Yeah.
And boom, she's gone.
But so anyway, the other thing that they should have noted, though, all the people, we haven't revealed the reveal yet, but it didn't actually happen. So anyway, that's where in the sequence. But So when she's died, that's made him angry again. He's angry with the guardian angel. He wants to go back to the Jesus of the axe philosophy, and the angel's sort of like, well, who are you going to axe?
Are you going to kill God? The angel says.
And so then the angel goes off on this thing that says there's really only one woman. Women aren't people.
No. Okay, so it's a really weird, awful sounding thing to say, but I see it. I took it from trying to make like an archetype of the feminine, perhaps even the divine feminine. Is like there's one archetype, and so. But yeah, it is a very problematic.
I thought it was meant to be that we should now be starting to understand there's something wrong with this angel. You know what I mean? And so I thought it was like, the angel is, we should now be starting to think the angel here is, if we didn't understand already that the angel is the father of lies, that the angel's counsel is not to be trusted. But nevertheless, the angel brings him now to Mary and Martha. And so now he has another family relationship in life, marrying Mary, and another Mary.
Yeah.
Goes back to his carpentry. So this is really that temptation that we talked about in this whole struggle between this divine calling, being God, being the divine sacrifice, or just having the regular life, because he produces a couple kids, and so he has kind of a regular family life.
Yeah, he goes back to being a carpenter, which is like the kind of thing that at the end of the Gospel of John, the resurrected Jesus sort of finds all the disciples
they'd all gone
back to being fishermen, and the old life
ways
that they had before they met Jesus. This is the middle-aged Jesus here is just a happy carpenter living with a very strange, unusual family, I guess, for modern standards.
He might have essentially has married both sisters.
Yeah.
And then, as they're running around, he hears a crazy preacher, and it turns out it's this zealot from earlier in the movie. And he identifies himself into the crowd as Saul, who had been a persecutor, a murderer of Christians, but now is like a Christian preacher, preaching a gospel of a risen Christ. Jesus goes and confronts him and says, "You're lying. I didn't do any of those things. I should know because I'm Jesus." And Paul more or less says, "Well, I made up all this stuff." And who cares what you are or what actually happens? What matters is people believe this stuff, and that's what makes it important. So
this is a very, very cynical Paul, not a very, very sympathetic picture of Paul, and also.
Well, he was already murdered Lazarus, so he is a pretty...
Well, but this is like the bad Paul before this whole scene at the road to Damascus. So before his conversion, he was a bad guy, and he himself says that. So now he should be a good guy, but he's still a very cynical guy.
Right.
And
so there's something wrong with the world.
So a lot of problems with this Paul also, because first of all, he's doing this kind of public preaching like that, as opposed to writing. We know the Paul of the letters, and in the letters, Paul is a very good orator. Like his writing is very persuasive. He knows how to write a good Greek letter, and he knows how to appeal. Like in good Greek writing of this era, you have to appeal to the ethos, the pathos, the whole thing. You have to do all these thanksgivings. There's a way of writing a letter, and he was very good at it, a very persuasive writer. But here, he's not a very good preacher. He's almost like sounds the same as Jesus, but now what he's preaching is like this. The whole thing is about Jesus now.
Yeah, no, very unlike how Paul preaches. He's actually focusing on a whole bunch of details of Jesus' life. That didn't sound very Pauline in terms of what we know from the historical Paul or the Paul in the Gospels.
And also, he sounds like a charlatan, pretty much, which is like it's the opposite of the way Paul presents himself in Galatians, for example. Like in Galatians, Paul calls the other apostles, he calls Peter especially a hypocrite, because Peter is like the one who really knows, and yet pretends a different gospel. It pretends like, all the things that I really know, don't matter, because now all these people are here from Jerusalem, and we have to continue with the old way of doing things. So he calls everyone else hypocrites, and he is the one that is the true Christian. But here is the opposite. This is a very cynical Paul.
Yeah. So Paul goes off, continues his thing. Jesus goes immediately back to his wives and all of his many kids, and he kind of ensconces himself in this kind of lived life that he's has in solace. Gets much older. We get to, I guess, the year 70. Jerusalem is being destroyed in the background. Kind of an old Jesus is leaving away from that and is essentially on his deathbed then soon thereafter. And while he's on his deathbed with his guardian angel there and his two wives, all of his old friends now suddenly reappear, and he meets Peter and Nathaniel and Judas, and they confirm things like that Jerusalem has been destroyed. Nathaniel is talking about how the Ark of the Covenant got destroyed.
It's
or stolen.
The what was stolen?
Yeah,
and
so
I don't think it was there. So I don't know what you're talking about, Nathaniel.
yeah, it was interesting because it might have been because of that ark thing that you'd identified before, where he was using that ark language, that then they kind of tied it into the Ark of the Covenant, but that was never in the Second Temple. But anyway, that's brought up. We once again have Judas then as a truth teller, and so essentially what Judas now condemns this Jesus. He says, look, you broke your promise. You said I had to do this thing. I had to betray you, and then you were going to do the your part, which was dying on the cross in order to bring salvation to everybody, but you didn't end up doing that. You came and lived this whole life that you've had here away from that. You didn't do what you said you would do, and that's why Israel's been destroyed. That's why everything's been destroyed. That's why none of this is working or something.
And once again, this is why I feel there's a clear psychological mirror between Judas and Jesus. Judas, in this case, is the faithful, strong character. Right. Jesus is the traitor, is the weak. Out of weakness, he betrays the whole plan, all his friends.
Yeah. And it's now when we realize that the angel is actually Satan, and Jesus then, with that realization, wants to turn back the clock, goes back, and as everything has been destroyed, climbs out of his deathbed and see the flames of Lucifer, who's rejected, and goes back to God. Well, do you still want me? I still want to. I want to go back and do the right thing and not do this. And so that ends up being the twist, which was this whole coda. Everything with the coming down off the cross and things like that was the temptation.
Which is at some point, it's kind of obvious that's coming.
Okay.
Like from the moment that this what if. Imagine alternative universe storyline starts to happen, is this is clearly the temptation, and this is probably all in his head.
So you anticipated that? I
anticipated that because you know what? It reminded me of there's a Star Trek episode where Picard falls into this.
I know. I was thinking about that too.
This planet where time passes really, really, really slowly, and in a matter of
he has a whole lifetime. He lives an entire lifetime in his head, yes. Because as a probe is taking over.
Right.
Anyway, I also made that kind of realization, because it was even happening once we saw the really old Jesus and he's got his kids around him and things like that. In some ways, it should have had that same emotional resonance that it has where the aged Picard has his children, his wife has died, his best friend has died. He has a son that he's named after. I'm going to cry because it's so moving. It's such a moving moment, and I didn't feel that for this Jesus. I'm sorry. I don't think it was handled anywhere near as well as that episode.
No, because he's not a sympathetic character.
So I was even thinking that, because I was thinking, this is the kind of thing that really gets me normally, and it didn't. So anyway, I can't tell you if I would have been anticipated it, because I had read some reviews of it, so it had been spoiled for me. Oh. So I knew actually, I knew it going in, so I can't even say what I would have thought or not in terms of that. But that's what ends up. So if you guys hadn't known this, I guess we should have given spoilers at the beginning of this. But now that's been spoiled for you. But this was the last temptation, and so that is how this is how they're exploring this thing. So his particular role was he had to be God, and he had to do this thing and not live a life and have a family and all that things. And so for all those protesters who didn't like him getting together with Mary Magdalene, that was all in his head anyway, so it didn't happen. So I don't know.
Right. And ultimately they get it wrong, because the temptation is not sex.
Yeah, the temptation was having the kids and having
The
a family.
temptation is have a normal family.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why, I mean, now that I've seen the movie, I know what the temptation really is. But yeah, I always thought the temptation was precisely that, Jesus having sex with Mary Magdalene.
Right. So yeah, that's what I had spoiled already because I'd read about some of the controversy and things like that. But in any event, this is how then it ends with the last lines that Jesus says from the Gospel of John. It is accomplished.
It is accomplished.
And so then that is the end.
So yeah, so this is now, in the previous analysis of the other movies, we had to go back and I thought, think a little bit, at least I do this, I try to deconstruct the proposed theology or the proposed economy of salvation specifically that we're proposing in a movie like this. I don't remember what we said about King of Kings, but I remember in the Passion of the Christ, the economy of salvation follows the ransom model.
Because specifically what happens is, in that end of that movie, Jesus has tricked, or God has tricked, or somebody tricked Satan, who ended up getting swallowed up inside Jesus, and therefore, and so therefore he tricked him essentially in order to, in the ransom theory of defeating death.
Yeah, it's like this idea of Origen and Gregory of Nyssa, who see Jesus tricking the devil to think that Jesus is weak and just human, and at the moment of death, once Jesus goes into death, then Jesus swallows up death in this reversal. And so that's why we see the devil just screaming at the end of the Passion of the Christ. Whereas here it's very different. The devil is definitely in control for a whole time when he's tricking Jesus. It's the devil who tricks Jesus, and Jesus here is the one who doesn't understand.
Yeah, and so that's not what has happened. Although he doesn't succumb to that last temptation.
He doesn't, but even we start with, even we don't know if the person we're seeing, this carpenter who makes crosses, is Jesus, and we get to the point where it's only at the end of the movie that Jesus really realizes how the whole thing works. He is tricked by the devil to think that in fact, he's not the Messiah.
So yeah, there's that, like you say, it wasn't clear. So at a certain point, when that starts happening, and he's saying he's not the Messiah, and yet there's still this background Christianity thing happening with Paul in the background, we don't really know what the counterfactual alternate history would have been like in this alternate universe that Satan was proposing if Jesus hadn't died on the cross, right?
It seems like everything that happened in the world was pretty much the same thing that happened anyway.
But maybe it was more cynically. And so, yeah, so one of the things in terms of that...
Had I been the devil, I would have just probably not included the destruction of the temple in my fantasy, but...
Yeah, well, then he wouldn't have been as upset at the end, right? Everybody wouldn't have been as upset. I guess it's not as much of a liar than you like you say.
What I find is, again...
So are you saying that would be more of a... instead of a ransom theory, it would be more of a exemplar theory. In other words, Jesus...
like the Abelard theory.
So moral exemplar, because in other words, you were proposing that I was saying that maybe this is a very individualized thing. This is a struggle that really only Jesus has, which is, are you going to become as the only fully human, fully divine being? Are you going to go off and be only human, or are you going to be divine? And so that's why I was suggesting, well, it's personal, kind of like a unique struggle that William Dafoe has, as opposed to any of the rest of us. But you're maybe saying that in doing that, he is being a moral exemplar for taking an eternal perspective, spiritual values, or whatever, that we then, in seeing him do that, we then follow that.
And I think that is for those of us who are watching the movie, who are reading the book. Jesus is this moral exemplar,
Okay.
a very flawed one, but of just accepting a certain spiritual destiny as opposed to the easy lifestyle that includes what we saw at the beginning, this participation of systems of oppression that we, to an extent, we all do. And so maybe that's why that scene really impacted me as well. Is Jesus here a moral example who understands the things that are bad, and it just doesn't really change until it happens to him? And then even at the very end, when he gets like a chance to get out of that, he takes that opportunity even though he had already committed to something else. That's why I thought of Abelard, which is like I think for modern Christians, this moral exemplar theory of salvation is a little bit more compelling than either this ransom theory or than Anselm's of Canterbury idea of the what's this called, this feudal system. The word escapes me right now. The satisfaction theory.
Yeah. Okay.
So it seems like really are.
Those are the problem with that is that's
very contextual.
Yeah, it's made a lot more sense 1,000 years ago than in how the world worked than it does in our world. So interesting, very good. David Latour says, can Paul be a zealot and a Roman citizen at the same time? Well, Paul wasn't a zealot, but he is in the movie. Is he a Roman citizen in the movie? I don't know, because nobody has all of the characteristics necessarily that they have in the different sources because it's not based on the sources. But I guess yes, you could be, because if you were, you just get to be a Roman citizen because you were born one, and then you become a zealot because you are secretly part of a sect.
Right.
So theoretically you could. Normative says, in a sense, we can view what happens here not as a temptation, but as a gift. Jesus both gets the sacrifice and the experience of living a full human life. So Satan has actually done a big favor for Jesus by letting him have that entire life.
Yeah, I thought about that, right? Like, he still lived the life.
Yeah, exactly.
He still had a night with, or more, with Mary Magdalene.
And Mary and Martha. Anyway,
right.
They had all the fun of having all those kids and all that kind of thing. Yeah, so it is a little strange. I mean, in that sense, that's also something like what I was thinking of in the Inner Light, that Star Trek episode, where it does impact and change Captain Picard because he's had this entire interior life that no one else knows about, but it was very real to him. And it was only in a later episode, but he shares that with somebody once. A very private person doesn't do that, and so that actually ends up being very moving. So in some ways, it's strange because he has that whole life, but he doesn't, it's in some ways then totally gets invalidated, right?
So according to Normative, really, he did trick
the
devil because he got the best of two worlds.
Interesting. Well, I want to thank some folks who've been supporting us in the chat. Natural Philosophy, Fire Ever Living, Mike Forbes, thanks so much for helping us out with this, with donations. Do you want to some other questions, or?
Let's see what Dartharama says. Isn't Scorsese just showing Jesus' human side more than the divine? All the other big Jesus movies do the opposite. Well, yes and no.
Yeah, I don't know. So in that sense, I actually think there was less shying away from Jesus doing actual, supernatural miracles here. So at least in the two that we just watched, that doesn't happen. It's very much on screen in those. So
in the King of Kings, we get, like, when he heals the blind, we only see the shadow of this.
Right.
And here we actually see
Like
the
a special
spit
effect.
and all the.
There's like a guy who has very deformed eye sockets or whatever, and then he has perfected eyes afterwards. We see, a very kind of earthy physical miracle in Lazarus coming back from the dead, and he's not fully revived by the time he gets killed again. In this, he seems like he's still a little ill looking, as he's still, I think, in the mid-recovery from death. And
whatever you want to make of that scene of him pulling his own heart out of his chest, that's not a very human thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's very graphic. Now, what I see that is very human is his psychology. What happens in his mind is something that is very relatable. That, yes, I think it's even more relatable than in other movies that don't get into the mind of Jesus as much as this one does. In the Passion of the Christ, we see at the beginning of the movie, Jesus just crying and shaking, but we really don't get the same, like the doubt, the hesitation, all the change of mind. Jesus is constantly changing his mind in this movie, like humans would do.
Yeah, he's saying,
at least some humans.
Yeah, well, he's saying a bunch of times, he's explaining, like Judas is really mad at him all the time. You keep telling us one thing and then you tell us another thing. You keep changing everything you do. First it was love, love, love. Then it was the axe. Now it's I got to get crucified. This is like, when is this going to stop, right? And so that is because, and Jesus explains, well, God only tells me so much, as it's going along. And so there is so he's opening new things are opened up to him as he goes along.
Yeah.
And so it's only when the seer comes and he reads him the suffering servant scroll, that he sees that full picture, and before that he's seen less, right? So that is like one way, because that's the thing that we've criticized before, that it was very difficult for the other movies to decide, are you going to have the real human Jesus of the synoptics, or are you going to have the Jesus that is always in control, like in the Gospel of John? And they kind of shifted back and forth between what they were doing.
The other movies too. But here, definitely, the very human element of temptation is present even till the very end,
right?
To the last temptation. Whereas, you could portray the humanity of Jesus, even like as the Gospel of John would do it. That even in the moment where Jesus weeps, Jesus still is showing humanity, but he's still in control of the situation. Whereas here, Jesus does a very theatrical incantation, something, I don't know if that's supposed to show the supernatural divine Jesus. At some point he does believe that he is God himself. He says that to the priest at the temple.
Right. So I think it's interesting because he's somewhat more human in some ways, like you say, I guess psychologically, and the fact that he is not all-knowing, for sure. In the way he's portrayed here, but on the other hand, there's also, people could be more believably presented even in King of Kings as maybe this is just a guy,
right?
So. Jeff Kuhn says, you guys talk about how you can't make the Gospels consistent with each other because each of the authors, has their own vision and so on, and talks about and has a different character portrayal. What if the movie is a satire that lumps all the Gospels and traditions together and shows how ridiculous it is? I don't think that's what it is, though. Actually, I think that this is a very earnest exploration, even if I thought it was sort of weird and I thought it was so it's an exploration that's fanfic in the sense that it changes the character so much that that it's not consistent with one of the Gospels or with all of them together, but rather it's focused on its thing, which is, if let's take a character who is fully human and fully divine, and there's that internal struggle between the two, as he's kind of how is he dealing with that dualism, which I think is a different thing.
But is it just a satire? And I was thinking a little bit of that when not necessarily like a satire, but if this thing about the bad preaching that we commented several times, and not only with Jesus, but also with Paul, he doesn't really do
he's
a good job. So I think, I thought, is this a deliberate attempt to show how someone saying these things in a crowd would be like, and how people would react to these weird things that this preacher is telling them? But I think that it's only putting things out of context and how we would take those.
I don't take it as a satire. I took it as people who didn't understand the material when they react to something that's very familiar to them, and they find it alien because it is 2,000-year-old stuff, and so unless you understand the context of it, it does fall flat.
Right.
And I presumed that's why why it seemed to fall flat for the makers of it.
But I think that's why at some point you might conclude that it's a satire. Now, this thing that you mentioned, Jeff, about just putting all the different gospel stories together, that doesn't necessarily mean that the intent is a satire, because that's very common. If you go to any church,
I'll do it.
And the Sunday preacher on duty usually will do that. We'll just talk about and we'll just mix all the different gospel stories together, even though supposedly he's talking about just one passage of one gospel. But that's a very common thing that Christians do all the time, in the same way that in the Christian imagination, like the story of...
Like we always talk about the Christmas story.
Christmas story.
There's two very different Christmas stories that are blended together as if they, and that's how it's told. So.
Even though it's contradictory, and you might say, well, but is it a satire that, Jesus is born in Bethlehem and is born in because of...
It's from.
Is from Bethlehem and is also from Nazareth.
Yeah.
And, well, people just have no problem with that, isn't it?
Right. So no, I think it's probably, anyway, I tend to think it was earnest. Mike Karpowitz asks, is gospel fan fiction useful for propagating Christianity, or is it counterproductive? I think actually it is very useful to be, I think people should be able to do these kinds of explorations. I don't think that there's anything counterproductive to it. And this is why I'm kind of very famously as we watch more of these, I hadn't seen all of them, but anyway, as we watch more of these, my favorite is The Life of Brian still, and that is a deliberate satire. And so I think that which is definitely fan fiction, and I think it's actually useful for understanding kind of the human nature, but also making fun of excessive religiosity, and it doesn't actually, it's not actually, even though it was people complained about it at the time that it's anti-Jesus, it actually treats Jesus very respectfully. But in any event, I think that this is the case too. So I think this is an earnest exploration of trying to understand this idea, even if, and as they said at the beginning of this is not meant to be, this is not based on the Gospels, this is not meant to be how it is or whatever, this is their own kind of a philosophical exploration.
But, yes, you might argue that movies like this are popular, and for people who are not really trained in scripture or theology, well, this is the story of Jesus. So, and it's going to happen with any movie. There are going to be problems. There's, as we saw in the analysis of the other two movies, that are things that are neither historical or scriptural or theologically accurate. And sometimes, especially in this movie and in The Passion of the Christ, there's all these really strange things that are total literary creations of the author. So is that good or bad? Because if then people who don't actually read the Gospels are going to end up thinking that is actually the story of the Gospels?
I don't know.
Well, my answer to that is I worry less about that than how a lot of people from the pulpit
Yeah, that's
interpret
right.
the
That's
gospel at any regular
That's
church.
much more
So that is
worrisome
something that that upsets me,
worrying
not
about-
this.
Yeah. I mean, there are different little things, little details. Movies like this obviously popularize this idea that, that Mary Magdalene is the secret wife of Jesus and things like that. And so that gets embedded into the popular consciousness, and I just have to endure that.
And yet it's a movie, and maybe you're confused about it, but you have all these ideas in mind. But then if you go to an actual church,
yeah, but I agree
and then
with
you get a preacher that
that's
interprets this in a very irresponsible way, that's more of a problem. That's what I don't
by
like.
far.
That's what's
I agree with you.
counterproductive.
That's the thing. That's the real problem. So, do we want to give our final analysis? What you thought of the movie? You like the movie? It's a good movie, or what do you think?
I thought it was slow for sure. I think yes, it could have been done in 1 hour, 1.5 hours probably. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting thought experiment about the what if, because what if is if you have participated in the Q&A after like John's lectures, there's always a lot of the lectures have at the end these what if questions. But what if this had happened, and what if this had happened? Well, this is a what if. What if Jesus had not at the last moment decided to go for this destiny of the cross? What if he had just pulled out?
Yeah. So for me, I agree with you, and I think it's an interesting idea. And so another one of these that is like that kind of a last minute ending counterfactual I don't know if it's only at the ending, is It's a Wonderful Life, right? So if George Bailey, his idea was he wasn't important if he hadn't been there, in other way, and actually the whole town was ruined because he's not part of it, right? And so I feel like this could have been. So if I take that example, which I think that's a very successful, popular movie that that people have a lot of strong emotions about, and I take that Star Trek episode, which is routinely listed as one of the best, The Inner Light, where Picard has this entire other life, and I feel like that idea is here, but I wasn't drawn into it or finding it very compelling. I sort of felt like we'd already had a lot of movie. And then we had this coda that goes on and on and on. And my notes were saying, please let this be the end of the movie, when he finally is back on the cross, And so I didn't really enjoy it. I thought it was way too long, and I wasn't struck with the character, because I I don't mind the idea of taking something where there was a progression. I don't like these Jesuses that are the Gospel of John Jesus. I think that's really boring in a movie.
Right.
So a Jesus that is going through struggles and developments and things like that. But it was so strange for me, this mixture between him being so uncharismatic and yet having this following, and having the confidence to do magic at certain times, but there was none of these, why any things like this were happening. Why did he get baptized? What did any of these things happen? It's pulling from, it's not based on the Gospels, but it's pulling from the greatest hits. Where he's just, kind of cockily saying, "Hey, I made all that wine." Just at that moment. What is that about? Why does he? I don't know. Yeah. So I found it to be more weird, for me anyway, more weird than good. But I'm on the minority on that. On Rotten, the thermometer, it gives it a good rank.
But I still think that I think it's a good thing to let the imagination just create these stories. I mean, ultimately we have, in some of the some of the later Gospels that did not make it into the canon sometimes have these crazy,
some weird
stories
details
about
that get
Jesus. Like those infancy Gospels that often we mention, and it's like, well, is it? So if we are opposed to these things. Like
I'm not opposed to it. I'm just saying whether or not.
No. I know, but like when the Christian right at that moment had that reaction to like.
Oh
like
yeah,
this,
I'm opposed to the.
This movie was banned in Argentina. That's why now I know why I didn't see this movie, because it was banned in Argentina and many other countries.
So
but,
I'm opposed to the critics. I'm just saying I also though didn't like it.
Right.
So, but I mean, it would have been. I like the idea of it. I just don't. Anyway, it was just so strange to me in all of its choices. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, if we cut 1 hour of the movie, especially we cut the scene of the heart in his hand, yeah, I think I would give it a thumbs up.
I don't know. I think that weirdness of it
my
might
thumb
be
is like this now.
something that was good about it. I don't know. So who knows? All right. Well, we thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Leandro's off on his trip, but we will be back to our regular lecture schedule next Tuesday, where we're going to be talking about the Tower of Babel. So please, if you're able, like and share this video, subscribe, and thanks again for the donations that people have been giving, and have a good night.